"She's erasing you tonight." The words were a ghost of a sound, a tiny puff of air against the sensitive skin behind her ear, almost lost in the grand, orchestral swell of a string quartet playing somewhere across the vast marble floor. They were delivered by a child, no older than 8, his small hand clutching a fold of the crimson silk that clung to her frame like a second skin. He stood beside her, pretending to admire the towering ice sculpture of a swan, but his dark, intelligent eyes were fixed on a point across the room. Zara Washington did not flinch, did not turn. Her training had hammered out of her any instinct for sudden movement, replacing it with a fluid, preternatural stillness. She was a statue in red, a splash of vibrant, living color amidst a sea of muted black tuxedos and glittering, champagne-colored gowns. The boy's whisper was the first crack in the perfect, polished veneer of the evening. It was a dissonant note in the symphony of wealth and power that filled the grand imperial ballroom. She allowed her gaze to follow the boy's, a slow, deliberate pan that betrayed nothing. Her eyes slid past laughing politicians and stoic business magnates, past crystal glasses brimming with golden liquid, until they found their target. A woman, impossibly elegant, draped in silver sequins, her black hair a severe, glossy sheet. She was clinging to the arm of a powerful man, the host of this opulent affair, Mr. Kong. The woman's name was Sujin. The boy's name was Minjun. And the man she was clinging to, the man whose empire was built on shadows and whispers, was his father. Minjun's small fingers tightened on her dress for a fraction of a second, a desperate, childish anchor, before he let go and melted back into the crowd, a small shadow swallowed by larger ones. Zara was alone again, armed with a child's cryptic warning. Erasing. It was a clean, sterile word for something brutal. What does it mean, truly, to be erased? It's not just about ending a life. It's about removing a presence, deleting a story, turning a person into a void. It is the ultimate act of control, to decide that someone simply shouldn't be. And tonight, according to a small boy with old eyes, that was her fate. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, the bubbles a faint prickle on her tongue. The cold glass was a steadying weight in her hand. Across the room, Sujin laughed, a musical sound that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. The game had just begun. And if you're watching this, if you're listening to this story unfold, I want you to pay close attention. Because the most dangerous threats rarely announce themselves with a roar. They begin with a whisper. Zara's mind was a clean, cold engine, processing the input with frightening efficiency. The boy, Minjun, was the catalyst. His fear was genuine, a raw, unvarnished thing in a room full of polished masks. Children don't invent threats of that magnitude. They reflect the anxieties they absorb from the world around them. He was the son of Mr. Kang's late wife, a detail she knew from the thick dossier she had committed to memory. His mother had been dead for 3 years. Sujin had arrived 1 year later. Zara's gaze drifted back to the couple. Sujin was a masterpiece of curated perfection. Her smile was precise, her gestures economical, her beauty a sharp, architectural thing. She was whispering something into Mr. Kang's ear, her red lips close to his lobe, one perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his chest. It was a public display of intimacy that felt more like a claim of ownership. But it was Mr. Kong himself who held Zara's focus. He was a lion of a man, or he had been. The photographs in her file showed a man with eyes that crackled with intelligence and ruthless energy. The man standing across the ballroom was a faded photograph of that person. His posture was slightly slack, his smile a beat too slow. When he lifted his glass, she noted a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand, a fine vibration he tried to hide by gripping the stem tighter. His gaze was unfocused, sweeping over the room without truly seeing it. He was present in body, but his mind seemed to be drifting in a distant fog. This wasn't the powerful, sharp-witted titan her clients, the family of his late wife, were worried about. This was a man being hollowed out from the inside, a compromised figure. The pieces began to click into place, forming the cold, sharp-edged outline of a conspiracy. The warning wasn't just about her. She was a complication, an unexpected variable. Her presence here, a discreet inquiry into Mr. Kang's well-being, had been noticed. And Sujin, the elegant predator in silver, had decided to eliminate the variable.
But why?
The answer was right in front of her, leaning heavily on the woman's arm. The real target wasn't the investigator in the red dress. The real target was the throne. Sujin wasn't just a girlfriend. She was staging a silent coup. And Mr. Kang, the king himself, was a ghost haunting his own life, completely unaware that he was about to be erased, too. The orchestra shifted from a sweeping waltz to a quieter, more contemplative adagio. The change in tempo mirrored the shift in Zara's own internal rhythm. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by the cold, clear focus of the hunt. Leaving was not an option. Walking away would be a death sentence, an invitation for a silent, professional follow-up. Her only path to survival was forward, through the heart of the threat. She needed to know the method, the timeline. Tonight was the only clue she had. She placed her empty champagne flute on the tray of a passing waiter, the crystal chiming softly. She began to move, not away from Sujin and Mr. Kang, but in a slow, calculated orbit around them. She used the dense clusters of guests as temporary screens, her red dress a flickering flame in their peripheral vision, never staying in one place long enough to be tracked. She was a ghost in the machine, observing every interaction. She saw Sujin gently guide Mr. Kang to a plush velvet chair, saw her murmur something to a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit who stood perpetually nearby. The man nodded, his face a granite mask. Zara catalogued him instantly. Head of security, Mr. Choi. He was older than the other guards, with flecks of gray at his temples and a weariness in his eyes that spoke of long service. As Sujin fussed over Mr. Kang, adjusting his tie with a proprietary air, Zara saw Mr. Choi's gaze sweep the room. It was a professional scan, but it wasn't random. His eyes found hers. It was for less than a second, a connection as brief and charged as a spark jumping a gap. There was no menace in his look. There was something else. A flicker of conflict, of deep, resonant unease. He knew. He knew something was wrong. He had been with the family for decades, loyal to the father, and likely to the memory of the dead wife. He was an insider, and he was conflicted. Have you ever been in a position like that? Trapped between loyalty to what was and the terrifying reality of what is? It's a quiet, personal hell. For men like Choi, loyalty is scripture. To see it perverted, to be forced to stand by while the man you swore to protect is dismantled piece by a viper in silver sequins, that is a torture of the soul. He broke the contact first, his expression reverting to impassive stone. But the message had been sent. A door, previously locked, now had a key. She just had to find the courage to turn it. Her opportunity came 20 minutes later. Mr. Kang was seated alone for a moment, while Sujin was drawn into a conversation with a city councilman, her laughter tinkling like carefully arranged chimes. Zara saw her chance. This was the riskiest part of the dance, the moment she stepped from the shadows into the light. She moved with purpose, her path designed to look like a graceful, accidental intersection. She allowed another guest, a portly man gesturing wildly as he told a story, to bump into her just enough to send her stumbling sideways, directly toward Mr. Kang's chair. "Oh, my apologies," she said, her voice a pitch of perfect, flustered sincerity. She put a hand on the arm of his chair to steady herself. Mr. Kang looked up, and it took a moment for his eyes to focus on her. "It's quite all right," he murmured, his voice thick, the words slightly soft around the edges. "Are you hurt?" "Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Kang," she smiled, holding his gaze.
Now.
She had seconds. "It's a wonderful party. Your late wife had such impeccable taste." She would have loved the arrangements. The mention of his wife was a calculated strike, a test. A healthy, grieving man would have a flash of sadness, of memory. Mr. Kang's reaction was blank. There was a flicker of confusion, a deep furrow in his brow, as if he were trying to access a file that had been corrupted. "My wife, yes. He trailed off, the thought dissolving before it could form. It was then that she caught it. As she leaned in, under the opulent scents of flowers and perfume, there was another smell clinging to the lapel of his jacket. It was faint, almost imperceptible, sweet, with a sharp, medicinal undertone. It wasn't cologne. It was chemical. Her blood ran cold. Scopolamine, perhaps. Or a bespoke benzodiazepine cocktail. Something designed to induce a state of compliance, to fog the mind and dull the senses. It was a slow, methodical poisoning. She straightened up, her smile never wavering. "Please enjoy your evening," she said softly. From the corner of her eye, she saw Sujin watching them, her conversation with the councilman finished. The predator's smile was gone. Her eyes were chips of ice. Zara had touched her prize, and the warning had been delivered without a single word. She had just confirmed the how. Now she understood the urgency. Tonight wasn't just a threat, it was a deadline. Zara moved away, melting back into the relative anonymity of the crowd. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath the calm exterior. She had confirmed the method and provoked the antagonist. The clock was ticking, and every passing second felt like a grain of sand slipping through her fingers. She found a position near a marble column, affording her a view of the main floor while keeping her partially obscured. She needed to think, to recalibrate. Choi was the key. The brief, desperate connection they'd shared was her only hope for an ally within the fortress walls. But she couldn't approach him directly. It would be too obvious, too dangerous for them both. She had to trust that his conflict was strong enough to make him act. She waited. The minutes stretched, each one a taut wire of suspense. She watched Sujin return to Mr. Kang's side, her movements smooth and possessive as she offered him a fresh glass of water. A glass she had poured herself from a carafe brought by a specific waiter. The poison was being administered right here, in plain sight, masked as an act of caring devotion. It was audacious. It was brilliant. And it was utterly terrifying. Then it happened. Mr. Choi spoke quietly to one of his subordinates, gesturing toward a hallway leading away from the ballroom. The younger guard nodded and moved to stand watch. Choi then began his own slow patrol along the perimeter of the room. His path was deliberate, bringing him closer and closer to Zara's column. He didn't look at her. He kept his gaze forward, his posture rigid. As he passed her, his hand brushed against the cool marble of the pillar. When he was gone, a small, folded piece of heavy linen, a corner torn from a cocktail napkin, lay in the shadowed recess at the base of the column. Her movements were liquid. She bent slightly, as if adjusting the strap of her heel, and her fingers closed around the napkin. She straightened, turning her back to the room as she unfolded it in the cup of her hand. The writing was a terse, blocky script, written with a pen. Study. Second floor. East wing. Code 8808. He keeps everything there. You have 10 minutes. It was more than she could have hoped for. It was access. It was a confirmation of her fears from the one man who would know for sure. But it was also a trap. He could be loyal to Sujin, luring her into a quiet, secluded place. It was a tremendous risk. But what choice did she have? To remain here was to wait for an invisible blade. To act was to walk toward a visible one. The choice was clear. The note was a testament to a man's breaking point. Mr. Choi had served a king, not a queen regent. His loyalty had finally found its true north. The journey to the second floor was a masterclass in misdirection. Zara moved with the unhurried grace of a guest searching for a restroom or a quiet place to take a call. She ascended the grand, sweeping staircase, her red dress a bold statement of confidence she did not entirely feel. Each step was a silent prayer that she wasn't being followed, that Choi's 10-minute window was real. The east wing was quieter, the sounds of the party fading to a distant, muffled thrum. The hallway was lined with portraits of Kang's ancestors, their stern, painted eyes following her progress. She found the study door, heavy, dark oak with a small, discreet digital keypad next to the handle. 8808. Her fingers hovered over the numbers. This is the moment, isn't it? The point of no return. The moment you commit to a course of action from which there is no retreat. We all face these doors in our lives, though most are not as literal as this one. Do you open it, knowing that everything will change? Or do you walk away, forever haunted by the question of what lay behind it? Let me know in the comments what you would have done. She pressed the numbers. A soft, electronic click echoed in the silent hall. The handle turned. She slipped inside, closing the door gently behind her, the lock engaging with a final, definitive thud. The room smelled of old leather, polish, and Mr. Kang's faint, masculine cologne. It was a space of immense power and control. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center, its surface immaculate save for a single, framed photograph of a smiling woman and a young boy, his late wife and Minjun. The walls were lined with books, not for decoration, but for reading. Their spines were worn. But Zara's attention was drawn to a small, elegant bar cart in the corner. Among the crystal decanters of whiskey and brandy was a small, unmarked vial of clear liquid next to a single, isolated water glass. Beside it, tucked partially under a medical reference book, was a prescription slip from a private physician. The patient's name was Mr. Kong. The drug was a custom compounded sedative, described as a memory and anxiety suppressant. The prescribing doctor's name was one she recognized, a disgraced physician known for selling his credentials to the highest bidder. This was the weapon. The vial was almost empty. Tonight's dose was likely the last. The final step before the accident. Her eyes scanned the desk. Choi had said, "He keeps everything here." She ran her fingers along the underside of the desk. Nothing. She checked the drawers. The top ones were locked, but the bottom right drawer slid open smoothly. Inside, beneath a stack of mundane quarterly reports, was a slim leather portfolio. She opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. Legal documents. Power of attorney transfers, amendments to his will, liquidation orders for several key holding companies. All of them signed within the last 6 months. All of them transferring staggering amounts of control and wealth directly to Sujin. The signatures were shaky, the spidery scrawl of a man not in his right mind. Sujin wasn't just poisoning him. She was systematically stripping him of his empire, piece by agonizing piece, before the final move. Erasing him. First his mind, then his legacy, then his life. The full, horrifying scope of the plan laid itself bare in the silent, leather-bound room. It was elegant in its cruelty, a slow, methodical strangulation of a man's entire existence. Sujin had played the long game. She had medicated him into a state of perpetual twilight, a suggestible fog where his signature could be easily obtained. She had isolated him from his family, his oldest friends, and any advisors who might question her influence. Zara's investigation, initiated by the concerned family of his deceased wife, was the one unforeseen complication. She was an outside observer with a mandate to look closely, a loose thread that could unravel Sujin's entire tapestry of deceit. Killing her wasn't just about tying up a loose end, it was about preventing the alarm from ever being sounded. And little Minjun, the ghost at the feast. He was the only one who lived inside the fortress with his father, the only one who saw the daily changes. Children are the world's most astute observers of patterns. They notice the subtle shifts in mood, the growing slowness of a loved one's speech, the way a person's eyes can be open but empty. He wouldn't have understood the complex financial machinations or the pharmacology of the poison, but he understood the fundamental truth. The woman in silver was making his father disappear. His warning to Zara wasn't just a desperate plea for a stranger's safety, it was a cry for help for his father. He had reached out to the only person in the room who seemed different, the one person whose observant, intelligent gaze suggested she might be able to see what he saw. He had placed his trust in the woman in the red dress. Zara took a photo of the documents and the vial with her phone, the quiet click of the shutter an act of defiance in the hushed room. She slid the portfolio back into the drawer, leaving everything exactly as she had found it. Her 10 minutes were nearly up. She had the proof. She had the what, the how, and the why, but knowledge without action is meaningless. She now faced the most dangerous part of the evening, returning to the lion's den, not as an observer, but as a disruptor. She had to confront Sujin, not just to save herself, but to pull Mr. Kong back from the precipice before he was pushed over the edge. The fate of an empire, a father, and a brave little boy now rested entirely on her shoulders. Returning to the ballroom was like plunging back into a warm, deceptively calm ocean. The music was louder now, the energy of the crowd rising with the late hour. Zara moved through it all, a crimson phantom on a mission. Her focus was singular, a laser beam cutting through the noise and distraction. She saw them near the French doors that led out onto a sprawling terrace, overlooking the city lights. Sujin was holding a glass of champagne, Mr. Kong a glass of water. The same one from the bar cart. She was sure of it. This was the moment. There would be no other. She approached them directly. There was no more need for subtlety, no more room for stealth. The time for observation was over. The time for confrontation had arrived. "Mr. Kong," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the nearby chatter. He turned his head slowly, his eyes struggling to place her. Sujin turned as well, and her polished smile was a mask of pure, distilled venom. "I believe you know my friend," Sujin said, her voice dangerously sweet. "She was having a bit of trouble with her balance earlier. I'm fine now, thank you," Zara replied, her eyes locked on Sujin. "I was just so struck by the decor, especially the attention to detail. It reminds me of a fascinating article I was reading on pharmacology, about custom compounds. Specifically, a drug sometimes used for memory suppression of flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible tightening around Sujin's eyes. It was the first crack in the porcelain facade. Zara pressed on, her voice dropping to a near whisper, for their ears only. And the complexities of international finance. For example, transferring assets from a holding company in Seoul to a private account in the Cayman Islands. It requires such a steady hand. A signature that isn't shaky. A mind that is clear. Mr. Kong was blinking, a deep frown of confusion on his face. He was trying to follow the conversation, trying to grasp the threads of her meaning. The fog was thick, but her words were sharp stones being thrown into it, creating ripples. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sujin said, her voice dropping its musicality, becoming flat and hard. "You're overwrought. Perhaps you should leave." "I think I'll stay," Zara said softly. She looked directly at Mr. Kong. "I think you should ask her about the prescription from Dr. Almazy. Ask her about the papers in your study. The ones you signed. The ones that give her everything." The name, Almazy, hung in the air between them. It was the key, the specific piece of knowledge she could not possibly have unless she knew the truth. Sujin's face, for the first time, lost its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated fury crossed her features before being suppressed. But it was too late. Mr. Kong had seen it. And more importantly, he had heard the name. A name he must have seen on the prescription bottle, a detail that had been buried deep beneath the layers of chemical confusion. "Almazy," he repeated, his own voice raspy with disuse. He turned his head, a slow, difficult motion, and looked at Sujin. He truly looked at her, not as the beautiful, doting woman on his arm, but as a stranger. The fog was beginning to part. The connections were being made. The constant fatigue, the memory lapses, the sweet taste in his water, the endless documents she asked him to sign. "What have you been doing?" he asked, the words a low rumble of his old authority beginning to reassert itself. "Darling, she's delusional," Sujin hissed, grabbing his arm tighter. "She's a corporate spy, sent by our rivals to sow chaos. Don't listen to her," but her touch, once a comfort, now felt like a cage. He pulled his arm away, a small but seismic act of rebellion. Zara saw Mr. Choi standing a few feet away, watching, his hand resting near his jacket. He was waiting for the signal. She also saw Minjun, standing near the doorway, his small face pale with terror and hope. He was watching his father, willing him to wake up. Zara took the final step. She met Mr. Kang's wavering gaze. "Your son tried to warn me," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "He knew. He saw her erasing you. The mention of his son was the final blow. It was the one pure, untainted thing in his life. The love for his child was the one wire Sujin had not been able to cut. Mr. Kang's eyes cleared. The powerful, ruthless man she had read about was suddenly there, looking out from behind the bars of his chemically induced prison. The ghost was gone, and the king had returned. He stared at Sujin, and the cold fury in his eyes was terrifying to behold. "Toy," he said, his voice no longer foggy, but a blade of cold steel. "Remove her, and call our lawyers. Tell them to cancel every document I have signed in the last 2 years." Mr. Choi did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his face grim, his duty clear once more. "This way, madam," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. The spell was broken. The coup had failed. In the quiet aftermath, the party continued around them, most guests oblivious to the silent, vicious war that had just been fought and won in their midst. Sujin was gone, escorted from the ballroom with a quiet, lethal efficiency that left no room for argument. Mr. Kong sat heavily in a chair on the terrace, the cool night air seeming to help clear the last vestiges of the fog from his mind. He looked older, more fragile than his reputation suggested, but his eyes were sharp again. He was wounded, but he was whole. Zara stood by the railing, the crimson of her dress a stark contrast to the dark sky. A small hand slipped into hers. She looked down to see Minjun standing beside her, his tear-filled eyes fixed on his father. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His small, trusting grip was thanks enough. Zara squeezed his hand gently. "Your father is going to be all right," she whispered. "You were very brave." He gave a small, solemn nod, a boy who had been forced to carry a burden far too heavy for his years. Inside, Mr. Choi was already making calls, his voice a low, urgent murmur. The machinery of Mr. Kang's empire was grinding back to life, excising the poison that had so nearly destroyed it. Zara's job was done. She had been hired to observe, but she had been forced to intervene. She had walked into a den of whispers and lies and had brought the truth, screaming, into the light. And this is the power you have, too. The power of observation. The power of asking the difficult questions. We live in a world of curated facades, of beautiful lies presented as truth. But if you look closely, if you listen to the whispers instead of the roars, you can see the cracks. You can find the truth. The story doesn't end here, of course. For Mr. Kong, there will be a long road to recovery, a painful reckoning with his own vulnerability. For Sujin, a different kind of erasure awaits, one carried out by lawyers and courts and the cold, unforgiving machinery of justice. But for tonight, a father has been returned to his son. A good man's loyalty has been reaffirmed. And a woman in a red dress showed that the courage to speak a single, difficult truth can be more powerful than any army. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of paying attention. Until next time, keep your eyes open. The truth is always there, waiting to be found.